The cold marble of the bar top against my palms is the first thing I remember, but the heat of her mouth is what keeps me awake. It started as a game, a reckless moment of anonymity in a city that usually demands every piece of my identity. I thought I was stealing a moment of freedom. I didn't know I was starting a war. Because the best kiss of my life wasn't just a stranger. She was the one person I was never supposed to touch. Now, the memory is a ghost I can't exorcise. My life had become a series of logistical fires I was paid to extinguish. 60 hours a week in startup operations does something to your brain chemistry. It replaces dopamine with cortisol and turns human interaction into a series of efficiency metrics. I was fried. My calendar was a Tetris game of supply chain crises and investor updates, and my apartment was just a place where I stored my laundry. I hadn't felt a genuine spark of anything, excitement, fear, desire, in months. I was numb, functioning on autopilot and stale coffee. That's exactly why Mia intervened. My sister is a glorious, chaotic force of nature who views my career focus as a personal affront to the concept of joy. She didn't ask if I wanted to go out. She simply appeared at my door, confiscated my laptop, and told me to put on something that didn't look like I was about to lead a quarterly review. We ended up at Bar Hazel, her current obsession. It was a subterranean space where the lighting was low enough to hide bad decisions, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive gin, sweat, and heavy perfume. The bass was a physical weight in the room, vibrating through the floorboards and into my bones, effectively drowning out the mental to-do list I couldn't seem to turn off. We were tucked into a booth, surrounded by Mia's inner circle of loud, vibrant friends who treated life like a contact sport. They were playing a game of dares designed to dismantle my professional shell. I was 3 cocktails deep, the sharp edge of my exhaustion finally dulling into a pleasant buzz, when Mia leaned over the table. Her eyes were bright with mischief, the kind that usually preceded a disaster. "Okay, ops manager," she shouted over the music, pointing a manicured finger at me. "I dare you to kiss the woman in the emerald velvet blazer at the end of the bar." I blinked, trying to focus. I turned in my seat to follow her line of sight. And then I saw her. The bar was crowded, a shifting sea of bodies and laughter, but she sat in a pocket of stillness that felt almost unnatural. She was sitting alone at the far end of the counter, wearing a deep green velvet blazer that caught the neon light in ripples. But it wasn't the clothes that pulled me in. It was what she was doing. In the middle of a deafening bar on a Friday night, she was reading a hardcover book. She had a glass of something dark near her hand, untouched. Her posture was perfect, her profile sharp and severe, radiating a calm authority that made the chaos around her seem irrelevant. She looked like she owned the space, or perhaps like she was merely tolerating it until something better came along. "She's out of my league, Mia," I said, turning back to my drink. "She looks like she eats startup managers for breakfast." "That's the point," Mia laughed, nudging me hard. "You need to be shaken up. You need a variable you can't control. Go on, unless you're scared." I should have been scared. I should have been rational. But the exhaustion had stripped away my filters, leaving behind a raw, reckless need for release. I didn't want to be the responsible one tonight. I didn't want to be the person who thought about consequences. I looked back at the woman in the green blazer. She turned a page, her fingers long and elegant, completely unbothered by the world. I felt a sudden, sharp pull in my chest, gravity shifting. "Fine," I said, the word tasting like copper and adrenaline. "Watch me." I stood up, my legs feeling lighter than they should have. The neon lights blurred into streaks of pink and blue as I moved. The walk to the bar felt like crossing a minefield, but for the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about logistics. I was just moving toward the fire. The 20 feet between the booth and the bar felt like crossing a time zone. With every step, the noise of the party faded into a dull roar, replaced by the frantic thrumming of my pulse. I tried to rehearse a playful line to mask my shaking hands, but my mind was blank. My operational efficiency vanished, leaving only raw nerves and the scent of gin. When I reached her, she didn't even blink. Her attention was entirely consumed by the text in front of her, creating a force field of solitude. I stood there for a beat, feeling foolish, feeling Mia's gaze burning into my back. I could have turned around. I could have claimed she told me to get lost. But the exhaustion dragging me down all week twisted into something reckless. Is the plot really that gripping? I asked, my voice lower than intended. She finished the paragraph, tracing the page corner before turning it. Only then did she lift her head, devastating up close. Dark, intelligent hazel eyes framed by shadows. She looked at me with amusement, like I was a minor logistical error she was deciding whether to correct. "It's better than the conversation in here," she said, her voice a rich alto vibrating through the noise. "Can I help you, or are you just hovering?" My lines evaporated. I used the only tool left: absolute, unvarnished truth. "My sister dared me to kiss you. I was going to try a pickup line, but you look like you'd eviscerate me if I did." Silence stretched. I expected her to laugh. Instead, a slow, dangerous smile curved her mouth. She closed the book with a deliberate snap. She swiveled her stool to face me, knees brushing my thigh. The contact sent a jolt of electricity straight up my spine. "A dare," she repeated. Her gaze dropped to my lips. "And are you the kind of woman who follows instructions? Or do you take what you want?" The challenge snapped my self-control. I stepped into her space. The air around her smelled of sandalwood and rain, a sharp scent that cut through the haze. She tilted her chin up, an invitation and a command. I leaned in, intending a quick, chaste brush of lips. But the moment we connected, the game disintegrated. Her lips were soft, warm, and shockingly responsive. It wasn't a peck. It was a collision. Time stuttered. The bass faded into a distant heartbeat as the world narrowed to the pressure of her mouth against mine. She made a small sound, a hum of approval, and her hand came up to rest on my waist. Her fingers gripped the silk of my blouse, pulling me against her velvet blazer. I felt the heat of her body seeping into mine, grounding me. I opened to her, deepening the kiss, my hands finding the nape of her neck. It was a slow, deliberate exploration, a conversation in a language I hadn't realized I spoke. It felt like falling, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. When we finally pulled apart, we were breathless. My forehead rested against hers, eyes locked in the dim light. Her pupils were blown wide. No mockery now, only raw intensity mirroring mine. "That," she whispered, voice rough, "wasn't part of the dare." "No," I managed. "It wasn't." I should have asked for her name. But the reality of what I'd done, the sheer, uncalculated vulnerability of it, hit me like a physical blow. Panic surged. I pulled away, stumbling back. I didn't say goodbye. I couldn't. I turned and walked away, weaving through the crowd with my heart hammering, holding the memory of her taste like a stolen jewel I was terrified to examine. Waking up that Sunday felt like surfacing from deep water too quickly. My head was pounding with the dull, rhythmic throb of a gin hangover, but my lips were still tingling. I lay in bed for 20 minutes, staring at the dust motes dancing in the aggressive morning sunlight, tracing the line of my mouth with a trembling finger. The sensory memory of the night before was stubborn. It wasn't just the taste of her, whiskey and rain, but the feeling of total surrender. For a few seconds in the dark, I hadn't been the one holding everything together. I had been held. And now, in the stark clarity of 10 a.m., the absence of her weight against me felt like a physical ache. I dragged myself to Mia's apartment for her mandatory recovery brunch. It was a ritual I usually tolerated with mild amusement, but today, walking into her space felt like entering a war zone without armor. Her apartment was a chaotic explosion of life, overflowing plants, vintage rugs, and enough natural light to X-ray my soul. The air smelled of bacon grease and expensive coffee. Her inner circle was already there, a cacophony of laughter and clinking glass, dissecting the previous night's poor decisions. I sat on the periphery of the velvet sofa, nursing a mimosa, guarding my secret like a fragile bird in my chest. I hadn't told Mia the details. I wanted to keep the woman in the green blazer for myself, a private jewel untainted by my sister's commentary.
"Okay, everyone, focus!" Mia shouted, clapping her hands from the kitchen island. She was beaming, vibrating with that frantic golden retriever energy she always had when she was plotting something. "She's parking now. You finally get to meet the legend, the woman who keeps the foundation from imploding while I have panic attacks about font choices. My work soulmate, the brilliant Amelia." I swirled my drink, feigning interest while trying to keep my headache at bay. Mia had been raving about this woman for months, the nonprofit director with the vision of a saint and the tactical mind of a general. In my head, I'd pictured someone older, safe, maybe wearing sensible shoes and a cardigan.
"Try not to scare her off," I muttered, my voice raspy. "If she's as organized as you say, this zoo might send her running."
"She can handle anything," Mia shot back, grinning. "She manages crisis interventions for breakfast."
"The buzzer! Act normal!" I rolled my eyes and took a long sip of champagne, preparing my best, polite but distant, professional mask. I heard the front door open. I heard Mia squeal. I heard the murmur of a low, rich voice that made the hair on my arms stand up, before my brain even registered why.
"Everyone, this is Amelia!" Mia announced, stepping aside to reveal her guest.
The glass in my hand tilted dangerously. The air left the room. Standing in the doorway, stripping off a beige trench coat, was the woman from the bar. She looked different in the daylight, softer, wearing a cream cashmere sweater that draped over her frame, her hair pulled back in a loose, messy bun. But the posture was the same, that effortless, regal spine. And the eyes, those devastating hazel eyes that had locked onto mine in the dark. She was smiling at Mia, a genuine, warm expression. Then she turned to the room. Her gaze swept over the group, polite and assessing, until it landed on me. The smile didn't drop, but it froze. Her eyes widened, a microscopic crack in the porcelain. We stared at each other across the expanse of Mia's living room, the memory of her mouth on mine crashing into the reality of her standing next to my sister.
"Amelia," Mia said, oblivious to the sudden vacuum in the atmosphere, grabbing my arm and pulling me forward. "This is my sister, the one I told you about, the logistics robot who needs to learn how to live a little." I was paralyzed. My brain was firing error messages. Target is asset. Asset is compromised. Amelia recovered first. She stepped forward, the scent of sandalwood hitting me again, bringing a visceral flashback of the bar's darkness. She extended a hand. Her fingers were long, manicured, steady. "It's a pleasure to finally meet the famous sister," she said. Her voice was cool, composed, stripped of the husky intimacy from Friday night. But her eyes were burning. I took her hand. Her skin was warm. The contact was electric, a live wire snapping against my palm. Last night, this hand had been gripping my waist. Today, it was shaking mine in a formal greeting. "Likewise," I managed, my voice sounding foreign. "I've heard a lot about you." "And I you," she replied. She didn't let go immediately. She held my gaze for a second too long, a silent acknowledgement of the secret we were now forced to share. "Well," Mia clapped, "mimosas for everyone. Amelia, sit next to me." Amelia withdrew her hand slowly, the friction of her skin against mine leaving a ghost sensation that made my knees weak. She turned away to follow Mia, slipping effortlessly into the role of the best friend. I sank back onto the sofa, my heart hammering. The anonymity was gone. The best kiss of my life wasn't a stranger. She was the one person I absolutely could not touch. But looking at the curve of her throat in the sunlight, I realized the terrifying truth. I didn't want to run. I wanted to finish what we started. 2 weeks is a long time to hold your breath. That's exactly what it felt like since the brunch, a suspended state of suffocation where I counted the hours between distractions. I avoided Mia's calls, cited vague work emergencies, and buried myself in spreadsheets until my eyes burned. But I couldn't dodge the dinner party. Mia had framed it as a celebration of life, which really meant she had mastered a new risotto recipe and required an audience. The apartment was warm, lit by candles that flickered against the off-white walls, casting long, dancing shadows. The air smelled of sage, brown butter, and the expensive red wine Mia insisted we open. And there she was, Amelia. She was wearing a silk blouse the color of midnight that left her collarbones exposed, looking effortlessly elegant, while I felt like I was wearing a costume of competence. Mia, in her infinite wisdom, had seated us directly across from each other at her small, intimate dining table. It was a torture device disguised as hospitality. The table was narrow. Every time I shifted, my knee brushed against hers under the tablecloth. I flinched, pulling back. She didn't. She just took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine, watching me over the rim with a terrifying calmness. The conversation flowed around us, a river of gossip and news. But between us, it was a cold war fought with professional pleasantries. "So," Amelia said during a lull, her voice smooth, cutting through the chatter about a mutual friend's new puppy. "Mia tells me you're scaling operations for a logistics tech firm. That sounds intense." "It's about efficiency," I said, gripping my fork a little too hard. "Eliminating waste, finding the straightest line between 2 points. It keeps things predictable." "Predictable," she echoed, testing the word like it had a slightly bitter taste. "I suppose there's safety in that. In my world, we deal with the messy parts of humanity. Advocacy isn't efficient. It's chaotic. It's about impact, not metrics." "Impact is hard to measure without metrics," I countered, the professional shield sliding into place, protecting me from the memory of her hands. "Otherwise, you're just throwing energy into a void. Or maybe..." She leaned forward, the candlelight catching the gold chain at her throat. "You're just afraid of the variables you can't put in a spreadsheet." The subtext was so loud it was deafening. "You're scared. You're rigid. You ran away." I held her gaze, refusing to blink. "Some variables are dangerous. Only if you don't know how to handle them." Mia laughed from the head of the table, completely missing the fact that her best friend and her sister were dissecting each other with words. "Oh, look at you two, bonding over work philosophy. I knew you'd get along." I nearly choked on my risotto. The tension ratcheted up with every course. By the time the main plates were cleared, the air felt thin. I needed an escape. I grabbed the empty wine bottle, standing up too quickly. "I'll get another from the kitchen." I retreated to the sanctuary of the galley kitchen, leaning against the granite counter and exhaling a breath I felt like I'd been holding for an hour. My hands were shaking. I reached for the corkscrew on the counter, fumbling with the foil, trying to regain my equilibrium. "You're trembling." I spun around. Amelia was standing in the doorway, filling the small space with too much electricity. "I'm fine," I lied. "You're a terrible liar," she murmured, reaching out to cover my hand on the bottleneck. Her fingers were cool, but they pinned me in place. "We haven't talked about it," she said, her voice dropping to that low, rough register that haunted my sleep. "There's nothing to talk about," I whispered, staring at her mouth, fighting the urge to lean in. "It was a mistake. You're Mia's best friend." "I am," she agreed. She took a step closer. Her thigh brushed mine, a deliberate echo of the table contact. "And that night, I wasn't. I was just a woman you wanted. You didn't seem to care about efficiency then." "I was drunk." "You were honest," she corrected. Her thumb traced the vein in my wrist, right over my racing pulse. "I can feel how fast your heart is beating. Is that efficiency?" "Amelia," I warned, but it sounded like a plea. "Tell me to stop," she challenged, leaning in until I could smell the wine on her breath, mixed with that maddening sandalwood scent. "Tell me you don't remember how it felt." I opened my mouth to lie, to push her away, but the words died in my throat. I couldn't. I wanted to lean forward and bridge the inch between us. I wanted to ruin everything. "Wine!" Mia's voice trilled from the hallway. We sprang apart, like magnets with the polarity reversed. Amelia turned to the counter, examining a bowl of lemons with intense fascination. I busied myself with the cork, ripping it out with unnecessary force. Mia breezed in a second later, oblivious. "What's taking so long? We're dying of thirst out there." "Just a stubborn cork," I said, my voice tight. I risked a glance at Amelia. She wasn't looking at me. She was watching Mia with a mask of perfect composure, but her chest was rising and falling too fast. I realized then that proximity wasn't going to fix this. It wasn't going to normalize it. Being near her was just feeding the fire, starving the oxygen, and making the craving unbearable. I walked back to the table, pouring wine with a steady hand, terrified by how much I wanted to spill the truth. 3 days later, my phone vibrated off the edge of my desk, shattering the fragile focus I'd managed to build around a supply chain audit. It was Mia. She never called during work hours, unless someone was dead or she had found a vintage sofa she couldn't lift alone. "She's drowning," Mia said the second I answered, skipping the pleasantries. "The gala is in 48 hours. The city just flagged the venue permit because of a fire code technicality, and Amelia is currently staring at a wall like she's trying to dismantle it with her mind. You have to go." "Mia, I'm at work. I can't just—" "You know the zoning commissioner," she interrupted, her voice pitching up. "You fixed that warehouse issue for your startup last month. You speak the language of bureaucracy. Please, she won't ask for help, but she's going to crash. Do it for me?" It was a manipulation, and we both knew it. But the image of Amelia, the woman who radiated such effortless control, breaking under the weight of logistics, twisted something in my gut. "Text me the address," I said, already grabbing my coat. Amelia's office was nothing like the sleek, sterile glass box I worked in. It was a converted loft space that smelled of old paper and frantic energy. When I walked in, the air was thick with the hum of phones and the frantic clicking of keyboards. I found her in the main conference room, standing before a whiteboard covered in red ink. She looked different. The velvet blazer and silk blouses were gone, replaced by a white button-down with the sleeves rolled up to her elbows and tailored trousers. Her hair was held back by a pencil, loose strands falling into her face. She looked tired, sharp, and devastatingly human. When she saw me, her shoulders dropped an inch. "Mia called you," she said, not a question. "She said you were fighting the city," I replied, dropping my bag on the table. "I brought reinforcements." She didn't argue. She didn't put up the walls she'd erected at the dinner party. She just handed me a stack of permit applications and pointed to a phone. "They're saying the occupancy load is too high for the exits. If we don't get the variant signed by 5, we have to cancel." "Give me 10 minutes to review the code," I said, sliding into the chair opposite her. For the next 3 hours, the tension between us shifted. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating pull of attraction I'd felt at dinner. It was kinetic. We fell into a rhythm that usually takes teams months to develop. I translated the bureaucratic jargon, she leveraged the emotional stakes. I drafted the appeal, she approved the language before I could even finish the sentence. Watching her work was dangerous. She was decisive, brilliant, cutting through obstacles with a razor-sharp focus that mirrored my own. We weren't two women pretending not to think about a kiss anymore. We were two generals on a battlefield, moving in perfect sync. "I got the commissioner," I said, covering the receiver of my phone. "He's faxing the waiver. We're clear." Amelia let out a breath that sounded like a prayer. She slumped back in her chair, closing her eyes for a second. When she opened them, she looked at me, and the professional mask slipped. There was admiration there, raw and undisguised. "You're terrifyingly good at this," she murmured. "It's just logistics," I said, my voice quiet in the sudden silence of the room. "Input, output." "No," she said, standing up and walking around the table. She stopped a foot away from me. The adrenaline of the crisis was fading, leaving that familiar electric hum in its wake. "It's control. And God, it looks good on you." The air in the room grew heavy again, charged with the shared language of competence. We had worked perfectly together, fitting into each other's gaps like a complex algorithm finally resolving. It was intimate in a way that touching her hadn't been. It was a meeting of minds that made the physical craving 10 times worse. I should go, I said, though my feet didn't move. Mia will want to know we fixed it. Mia, she repeated, the name acting as a physical barrier. She stepped back, the distance returning, but her gaze lingered on my mouth. Thank you for saving us. I didn't do it for the gala, I said, turning to the door before I could do something reckless. I just hate seeing good systems fail. I walked out into the cool evening air, my heart racing not from the stress of the work, but from the terrifying realization that we made a perfect team. And that was the most dangerous variable of all. The rain against my apartment window wasn't just weather. It was a containment field. Outside, the city was dissolving into gray slush and traffic. But inside Unit 4B, the world had shrunk down to the blue light of 2 laptops and the smell of cold pad thai. It was nearly midnight. We should have wrapped up the gala strategy hours ago. The variance was signed, the crisis averted. But neither of us made a move to leave. We were sitting on the floor, surrounded by a sea of printed floor plans and guest lists, creating a logistical fortress to keep the silence at bay. You missed a vendor check-in here, I said, pointing to her screen. My voice sounded too loud in the quiet room. If the caterers don't load in by 4, the bar won't be set for the VIP hour. Amelia wasn't looking at the screen. She was watching me with a heavy, lidded gaze that made it difficult to focus. The professional armor she'd worn at the office had softened, leaving someone looking for a place to rest. You treat every minute like a potential disaster, she observed softly. Do you ever just let things happen? Or do you have a contingency plan for breathing? I stopped typing. I looked over at her. The distance between us on the rug was negligible. I plan so I don't have to panic. It's safer. It's lonely, she countered. She shifted, and her shoulder brushed mine. It was a small contact, barely a graze, but in the heightened atmosphere of the room, it felt like a tectonic shift. You hide behind a logistics. You make yourself a machine so no one notices you're actually feeling everything. And you? I challenged, turning to face her fully. The movement brought our knees together. You bury yourself in causes. You save everyone else so you don't have to look at your own empty house. She flinched, just slightly. The truth landed between us, sharp and undeniable. We were 2 sides of the same coin. Women who built walls out of work to keep out the things that could hurt us. Maybe, she whispered. Her gaze dropped to my mouth, then back up to my eyes. The air thickened, charged with the same magnetic pull that had dragged me across the bar on Friday. But this wasn't a game. There was no dare, no audience, no gin-soaked bravery. There was just the rain, the blue light, and a desperate, clawing need that had been building for days. You have a vision that terrifies people, I said, my voice dropping to a murmur. That's why you're good at what you do. You see the world not as it is, but as it could be. I'm seeing it right now, she breathed. She reached out, her hand cupping my jaw. Her thumb traced my cheekbone, trembling slightly. That small tremor undid me. It was the crack in her perfection, the proof that she was just as wrecked by this as I was. I leaned in. We collided. This kiss wasn't like the first one. That had been a performance. This was a confession. It was desperate, messy, and consuming. Her hands tangled in my hair, pulling me closer until there was no space left. I pressed her back against the sofa, the floor plans crinkling beneath us, forgotten. I tasted the coffee on her tongue, felt the frantic rhythm of her heart against my chest. It felt like starvation finally being fed. For a few glorious, stolen minutes, there was no sister, no friendship, no consequences. There was only the heat of her skin and the way she sighed my name into my mouth. Then, a vibration on the floorboards shattered the world. My phone lit up next to us. The screen flashed a photo of Mia making a goofy face. A text preview popped up. Don't work her too hard. She needs her beauty sleep for the big night. The name Mia hit us like a bucket of ice water. The guilt was instantaneous. I can't, she choked out, gathering her blazer with shaking hands. She trusts us. She trusts me.
I know, I said, my voice sounding broken. I pulled my knees to my chest, feeling the sudden cold where her body had been. This was a mistake, she said, standing up, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. It was the stress, the late night. It won't happen again.
Right, I lied, looking up at her. Just stress.
She fled into the rain without another word, leaving me alone with the blue light and the ghost of her touch burning on my skin. We both knew it was a lie. We weren't stopping. We were just getting started. The weeks leading up to the gala became a masterclass in operational deceit. We built a supply chain of secrets, constructing a parallel reality where we could exist without consequences. The reality of the affair lived in the margins. It was the locked office door before a vendor meeting. It was the car parked 3 blocks away in a shadowed alley, windows fogging while the engine idled. It was the elevator ride, where we stood on opposite sides staring straight ahead while the tension threatened to short the panel. The thrill was sharp, addictive, but always chased by a wave of nausea, reminding me exactly what I was risking. The worst part was the ease. We were terrifyingly good at compartmentalizing. But Mia became the ghost at every feast. She would breeze into the office, beaming at her dream team, oblivious that the perfume on my collar matched the one on Amelia's neck. Every smile she gave us felt like a knife. I was betraying the sister who saved me with the one person she loved most. It wasn't just physical anymore. In the quiet moments, we found an anchor in each other. We stripped away the titles and found we were both just lonely people, terrified of being seen.
I can't lose her,
Amelia whispered one night, sitting on the edge of my bed.
Mia is the family I chose. If she finds out, I lose my home.
Then we stop, I said, though the words tasted like ash.
I know,
she said, eyes dark and wrecked. But being with you is the only time the noise goes quiet. We clung to each other like castaways, ignoring the storm. But the calendar was relentless. The gala was looming, a fixed point where all the lines we had blurred would have to be drawn in permanent ink. The Metropolitan Hall had been transformed into a masterpiece of logistics and light. It was exactly what we had planned during those late nights on my floor. A symphony of crystal, gold, and carefully orchestrated movement. But standing in my tuxedo suit at the edge of the ballroom, holding a glass of champagne that had gone warm in my grip, I felt like a spectator at my own funeral. The air was thick with expensive perfume, the hum of string instruments, and the murmur of 600 high-net-worth donors. But all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears. The pressure cooker we had been living in for weeks had finally whistled, and the sound was deafening. There she was, Amelia. She was wearing a gown that looked like liquid silver, moving through the crowd with that terrifying, effortless grace that made my chest ache. She was the sun, and everyone else in the room was just caught in her gravity. I watched her laugh at a donor's joke, watched her hand touch a board member's arm lightly to emphasize a point. It was a performance, flawless and distant. But I knew the woman who unraveled in the dark. I knew the sound she made when she lost control, the way her breath hitched when I touched the sensitive skin of her neck. And the knowledge that I couldn't walk up to her, couldn't touch the small of her back, couldn't claim even a fraction of her attention in the light, was a physical agony. It felt like I was choking on the secret. Then, the crack happened. Amelia looked up. Across the sea of black ties, she broke our cardinal rule. She didn't look at me like a colleague. She looked at me with a raw, naked hunger that stripped the room away. It was a look of possession, open and dangerous. "Careful," a voice said beside me, sharp as a razor. I froze. It was Sarah, one of Mia's sharp-eyed friends from the brunch. She wasn't looking at me. She was following my gaze to Amelia, her expression unreadable but calculating. She took a sip of her drink, her eyes narrowing. "You look like you're about to set the room on fire, Carter. People notice fires, especially when they burn down the house." The threat was subtle, but it hit its mark with the force of a physical blow. The panic spiked, cold and sharp.
I set my glass down on a passing tray with a clatter and turned away, my heart hammering against my ribs. I needed air. I needed her. Not the director, not the image, her. I texted her one word. Now. I waited in the coat check alcove, a narrow, dim hallway lined with furs and wool coats that smelled of winter and money. It was quiet here, the music muffled by heavy velvet curtains, isolating us from the perfection we had built. When Amelia appeared a minute later, she looked flushed, her eyes darting around the corner to ensure we were alone.
Are you insane?
She hissed, stepping into the shadows with me, her voice a frantic whisper.
Sarah was watching you. If she tells Mia...
I don't care about Sarah, I interrupted, my voice shaking with the force of the adrenaline crashing through me. I'm done, Amelia. I'm done watching you from across the room. I'm done being the mistake you hide in the dark while you play the perfect saint out there. She stopped, her chest heaving beneath the silver silk. What are you saying? I want the daylight, I said, stepping closer, ignoring the warning bells screaming in my head. I want to walk out there and take your hand. I want to be with you, really with you. Or I want nothing. I can't be a shadow anymore. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Amelia looked at me, and I saw the fear win. It washed over her face, extinguishing the heat, leaving only a cold, terrified resolve. She took a step back, putting physical distance between us. I can't, she whispered, the words sounding like they hurt her physically. I can't do that to her. I can't lose my life for this.
For this?
I repeated, the words tasting like bile. Is that all it is to you? A risk calculation?
It's a fantasy, Carter, she said, her voice trembling but hard as stone.
It's a beautiful, reckless fantasy. But out there, in the real world, it destroys everything. And I won't be the one who swings the wrecking ball. She turned and walked back toward the light, back to the applause and the safety of the lie. I stood alone among the empty coats, feeling the absolute, crushing weight of rejection. I didn't go back in. I walked out the side door into the cold night, realizing that the silence wasn't protecting us anymore. It was killing me. The sun rose like a bruise, offering no warmth. I hadn't slept. I spent the hours between the gala and dawn on a park bench, dismantling every excuse I had built. The operational efficiency I prided myself on had collapsed. I had treated people like variables in a risk assessment, and the result was a catastrophic failure of the heart. I arrived at Mia's apartment at 8 a.m. My key felt heavy in the lock, like I was breaking into a life I no longer had the right to access. When I stepped inside, the air smelled of coffee and fresh pastries, a cruel normalcy that made my stomach turn. Mia was on the sofa, scrolling through gala photos on her tablet, still wearing her silk robe, looking radiant and victorious. There she is, she beamed, looking up. The ghost of the ball. You vanished before the toast. I assumed you went home to crash, but... She stopped. She lowered the tablet. She saw my face, the red-rimmed eyes, the crumpled suit, the absolute devastation etched into my posture. What happened? Is it Mom? Is it the business? Sit down, Mia, I rasped, my voice sounding like gravel. I didn't let myself hesitate. I didn't soften the blow with preamble or logistics. I sat on the edge of the coffee table, facing her, and I pulled the pin on the grenade.
The woman at the bar,
I said, staring at my hands because I couldn't look at her. The dare. It wasn't a stranger. It was Amelia. The silence was suffocating. I don't understand, Mia said. It was Amelia, I repeated. We kissed that night. We didn't know until brunch, and we didn't stop. The late nights, the permit crisis, we were together. I laid it all out. The timeline, the lies, the depth of feeling we buried under her trust. Mia didn't scream. She went unnaturally still. When she finally looked back, her eyes were filled with profound disappointment. You thought I was the villain. No, I pleaded. We thought we were protecting you.
You didn't protect me.
she cut in, voice sharp. You excluded me. You looked at me, your sister, her best friend, and decided I was too fragile to handle the truth. You made me the antagonist in your tragedy without giving me the chance to just be happy for you. The words hit harder than a slap. We had constructed a cage of lies because of our own cowardice, using her as the excuse. I'm sorry, I whispered. I risked everything. I risked you. Yes, you did, Mia said, standing. She walked to the window, her back to me. And trust doesn't grow back overnight. You hurt me, both of you. You made me look like a fool in my own home. She turned around, her expression steel. But I know Amelia. I know she doesn't let people in. And I know you. You haven't looked alive in years until now. She pointed at the door. So if you really love her, if this wasn't just some twisted game to blow up my life, then you go fix it. You don't get to break my heart and then give up on hers. That would be the real waste. Mia, .. Go, she ordered, her voice cracking. Fix it. And don't come back until you're ready to tell me the whole truth. Always. I stood up, my legs shaking, feeling the weight of her grace and her anger. I had broken the system, but she had given me a manual for repair. I walked out of her apartment, leaving the door unlocked behind me, stepping into the cold morning with a heavy heart, but a singular, terrifyingly clear objective. The logistics were gone. Only the variable remained. I found her exactly where I knew she would be. There's a bench on the far edge of the Riverwalk, shielded by a row of skeletal oaks, where the frantic noise of the city fades into a dull, white noise hum. It's her decompression chamber, the place she goes when the world demands too much of her. She was staring at the gray, churning water, wrapped in her beige trench coat, looking like a statue of regret carved from marble. I didn't announce myself. I didn't clear my throat or check the perimeter for spies or mutual friends. I just walked up and sat down beside her. The cold metal of the bench bit through my trousers, grounding me in the freezing reality of the morning. She didn't jump. She didn't even look at me. She just exhaled, a cloud of white breath vanishing in the sharp air. I'm drafting my resignation letter in my head, she said, her voice flat and hollow. I figure if I leave the city, take a position in Chicago or maybe London, Mia won't have to deal with the awkwardness of hating me. She doesn't hate you, I said quietly, watching a barge drift slowly downstream. Amelia turned then, her eyes red-rimmed and guarded, panic flaring behind the hazel. You told her everything. The bar, the office, the rain, the gala, all of it. Amelia flinched, pulling her coat tighter as if bracing for a physical blow. And she was furious, I admitted, turning to face her. Not because we fell in love, Amelia. Because we didn't trust her enough to tell her. We treated her like a fragile barrier instead of a sister. We made her the villain in a story she didn't even know she was in. Amelia let out a shaky laugh that sounded more like a sob. She looked down at her hands, the hands that had held me together when I was falling apart. I was trying to save it. I thought I had to choose. I told myself I was being noble. That if I wanted you, I had to lose her. And I couldn't survive losing her. You were wrong, I said, my voice gaining strength. The only way you lose her is if you keep hiding. The secrecy is the poison, not the love. We were so obsessed with the logistics of the disaster that we created the wreckage ourselves. She stared at me, searching my face for the lie, for the strategic pivot. But I had no strategies left. I was just a woman sitting in the cold with her heart in her hands. She told me to fix it, I whispered. She told me not to waste this. She knows, Amelia, and she's still standing. Amelia's composure finally cracked. The tears spilled over, hot and fast, tracking down her cold cheeks. I'm scared, Carter. I don't know how to do this in the light. I don't know how to be this vulnerable without a safety net. Neither do I said, reaching out. I didn't grab her hand. I just laid mine on the bench between us, palm up. An offering. But I'm done calculating the odds. I'm done with the shadows and the back alleys. I want the variables. I want the mess. I want you. She looked at my hand. Then she looked at the river. Then back at me. Slowly, deliberately, she made her choice. She didn't just take my hand. She stood up, pulling me with her. To hell with the safety net, she breathed. She stepped into me, closing the gap that had defined us for months. She grabbed the lapels of my ruined tuxedo jacket and pulled me down. The kiss wasn't frantic like the one in the rain, and it wasn't a performance like the one at the bar. It was solid. It was claiming. It was a public declaration in the middle of a Thursday morning park that we belonged to each other. People walked by. A runner jogged past. We didn't break apart. We stood there, anchored in the daylight, finally breathing the same air. 6 months later, the Sunday brunch ritual has a new seating chart. I'm next to Amelia, my hand resting openly on her thigh under the table, grounding us both. Mia is across from us, laughing so hard she's spilling her mimosa, the tension replaced by a messy, honest architecture of family. Sometimes, the most efficient path to happiness is the one that breaks every rule. If you've ever found love in the place you feared most, subscribe and share your story.